SCO, an exemplary organization for the multipolar world. Have you heard of SCO or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? Interestingly, many people have not, although it's one of the largest multilateral organizations. Made up of 10 country members, including Russia, India, China, and Iran, SCO represents 42% of the world's population and 80% of the landmass of Eurasia. It's a very unique and pivotal organization that focuses on security and development, unlike the warmongering alliances like NATO. More importantly, SCO will play a key role in the coming years. Welcome to Geopolitics Demystified, where we bring in perspectives you do not see or hear in the mainstream media. I'm your host, S L Kanthan. Let's dive into SCO's history, achievements, challenges, and future. SCO has its origin in the Shanghai Five, which was created in 1996 to resolve the border issues between China and its neighbors. The China-Russia border alone is around 4,000 kilometers long, and China shares 3,000 kilometers of borders with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. The geopolitical fact is that borders are often the most difficult problems to resolve. However, within 5 years, the Shanghai Five had finalized their borders. Boosted by their diplomacy and ability to solve thorny issues, the 5 countries created the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in 2001 and added a 6th member, Uzbekistan. This time, the members decided that their primary focus would be terrorism, separatism, and extremism. Curiously, SCO was created just a few months before the 9/11 attacks, demonstrating that the members fully understood the geopolitical challenges. Over the next 2 decades, SCO expanded to include India, Pakistan, Iran, and finally Belarus this year. The inclusion of India and Pakistan, the arch-rivals in South Asia, reveals the maturity and vision of SCO. Also, together with its observer states and dialogue partners, the SCO's big family includes 26 countries on 3 continents. Now SCO is interested in not only terrorism, but multidimensional issues such as trade, economics, tourism, technology, cultural diversity, etc. The UN has established a strategic partnership with SCO, and the UN Secretary General regularly attends SCO meetings. Looking back, one of the most important accomplishments of SCO was to stabilize the so-called STAN countries in Central Asia. If you play chess, you would know that the most strategic area is the center of the chessboard. Similarly, if you look at the map of SCO, what do you find in the center? Central Asia. Thus, Russia and China spent a lot of efforts stabilizing this crucial area. And they've done a great job, which helps everyone in SCO, especially China, Russia, and Iran, but also India and Pakistan. The only remaining region of instability is Afghanistan, which could benefit a lot from China's infrastructure projects. Another critical problem in SCO is India's border disputes with Pakistan and China. Even if they cannot be solved in the near future, hopefully the countries will be able to manage them and prevent the problems from escalating. What makes SCO unique and admirable is that it's not based on divisive geopolitics. It has a non-aligned status, meaning it's not anti-West or anything. It adheres to the so-called Shanghai Spirit, which include wonderful principles such as mutual benefit, common development, and respect for cultural diversity. Why terrorism matters so much. Think about the terrorist attack in Moscow in March this year. Just 4 armed terrorists barged into the Crocus Music Hall, set it on fire, and killed 145 innocent concert goers. More than 500 people were injured by bullets or fire. Such incidents traumatized the entire nation. Terrorism is an extremely difficult puzzle to solve since it's unpredictable and has no definite characteristics. For example, most of the terrorist groups are quite small in size and last for less than a year. A terrorist group can be made up of 50 people or 10 or even just one, and the people can be easily radicalized thanks to the internet. The weapons are also varied. Anything from a machine gun, pistol, bomb, knife, or even a car can be turned into a weapon. Who gets radicalized is also not always clear. Although it's mostly poor and uneducated people, it could also be a well-educated middle-class person. For law enforcement, finding a terrorist is like finding a needle in a haystack. No one country can prevent terrorism, which is a global phenomenon. Countries need to cooperate with each other in many formats. Here are two examples for why counterterrorism depends on international collaboration. Consider the Belt and Road Initiative trains, which link China and Europe. Every month, about 1,700 freight trains leave Chinese cities like Xi'an and deliver goods to 200 cities in 25 European countries. However, Chinese law enforcement can only protect the trains up to the Chinese border. Once it leaves China and goes to, say, Kazakhstan, the safety of the train depends on the Kazakh police and intelligence, who need to have close relations with the Chinese. Else it'll be very easy for a small terrorist group to bomb the trains or the tracks and disrupt billions of dollars of global commerce. Similarly, oil and gas pipelines, seaports, airports, etc., require coordination and trust between countries around the world to ensure safety and prosperity. Another example is how thousands of terrorists from Xinjiang in China sneaked out and went to Syria. Between 2013 and 2015, about 10,000 Uyghur separatists from China joined various jihadist groups associated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS in the Syria-Turkish border. Over the next few years, these terrorists became battle-hardened and acquired dangerous skills. They made several videos claiming that they planned to go back to China and, quote-unquote, liberate Xinjiang. In this case, China needs a lot of help from the neighboring countries, Syria, Turkey, and Iraq, to monitor and perhaps even arrest these terrorists. Thus, countries need to work with one another to track the flow of terrorists, money, and arms around the world. However, this effort faces another formidable challenge. Some countries actually actively support, arm, and fund and train terrorists for geopolitical purposes. The terrorists are simply cheap and expendable mercenaries for the puppet masters. U.S. support of terrorists in Syria. Let's dive into this topic in depth to understand the problems that SCO countries face. It may be shocking to many, but the biggest sponsor of Islamist terrorism in the world are the U.S. and its allies, with the U.S. obviously taking the leading role. We all know how the U.S. armed, trained, and funded the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 1980s in order to fight the Soviet Union. The U.S. brought in young radicalized Muslim men from all over the world and told them they were fighting for God. The CIA called it Operation Cyclone, which involved arming and training these men to fight the communists. Even children were recruited, although it's against international laws and treaties. Bin Laden became America's best friend, and he was labeled as a freedom fighter. Of course, when the war was over, the Mujahideen transformed into, guess what? The Al Qaeda. Fast forward to 2011, the US created a version 2.0 of the Mujahideen to do a regime change in Syria. This time, the US recruited almost everyone around Syria: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan, Israel, and Turkey, as well as the UK and France. Then, weapons and militants flowed from Jordan and Turkey into Syria in 2011. When these terrorists were not able to create a sufficient revolutionary movement, because President Assad was still very popular, Al Qaeda was brought in. In February 2012, Hillary Clinton's foreign policy advisor, Jake Sullivan, who is now Biden's advisor, sent her an email saying, Al Qaeda is on our side in Syria. This email was revealed by WikiLeaks in 2016. The CIA was actively involved in this subversion, of course, and the effort was called Project Timber Sycamore. There was also another WikiLeaks email that showed a document where General Flynn wrote that the US was actually supporting groups that were affiliated with the Al Qaeda. But his memo was conveniently ignored by the Obama administration. Later, Hillary Clinton wrote an email saying, if we need to help Israel, we need to do a regime change in Syria. Thus, there were all these geopolitical reasons that were totally hidden from the public. Then dangerous weapons such as mortars, rockets, shoulder-powered missiles, etc., were sneaked into Syria from Turkey and Iraq. Later, ISIS was created to inject more violence and brutality in order to win the war. And whenever the terrorists started to lose, bingo, US fighter jets would suddenly appear out of nowhere and bomb the Syrian army. This monstrosity went on for about a decade and is now a frozen conflict. The result is, of course, a Syria that has been carved up into different regions occupied by the Kurds and Islamist fundamentalists. The US also occupies a region that is rich in oil and wheat. The moral of the lesson here is that if you're not careful, terrorism will destroy your country. For China, the Xinjiang region is vulnerable to separatism and terrorism. The US would have easily created a Syria-like situation in Xinjiang if China had not been vigilant. Fortunately, China was able to crack down upon the plague of extremism and bring peace and prosperity to the region. Now, more than 200 million tourists visit the beautiful and peaceful Xinjiang every year. Similarly, other SCO Central Asian countries have also spent a lot of efforts in containing fundamentalism and Salafism over the last 2 decades. It's really a miracle that every country in the region did not turn into an Afghanistan. SCO versus NATO. Some Western media propaganda has been trying to fearmonger by claiming that SCO is like NATO. First of all, these same media glorify NATO, according to their logic. So why are they complaining? Second, SCO is nothing like NATO. NATO is death and destruction. SCO is peace and prosperity. SCO is not a military alliance. There's no treaty. There's nothing like NATO's Article 5, which says that if one country is attacked, then everyone jumps in to help the country. This is why none of the SCO countries are sending in weapons to Russia or declaring wars against Ukraine, EU, and the US. Also, consider how NATO members are forced to spend some certain percentage of their GDP on NATO's military budget, which mostly goes to buying American weapons. It's a racket. And the US places missiles, missile defense systems, and even nuclear weapons in NATO countries. Nothing like these agreements exists in SCO. Russia and China are not using Central Asia like what America does to Europe. And while NATO has waged perpetual wars since the end of the Cold War, SCO has not waged any wars. It's just not SCO's vision or purpose. NATO depends on conflicts to justify its own existence. Imagine if Russia and Europe had good relations. That would mean no need for NATO. Back in 1949, when NATO was first created, the first NATO Secretary General, Lord Hastings Ismay, said that NATO's purpose was to keep Russians out, Germans down, and Americans in. It's still true. Only you can replace Germans with Europeans. That is, NATO's purpose is to keep Russians out, Europeans down, and Americans in. NATO is an extension of the American empire. Europe simply becomes an American vassal. Even before the Ukraine war is over, NATO is planning on extending to Asia in order to fight China. Hello, World War III. Global domination is what NATO dreams of. As a Chinese proverb says, an evil man will burn down his country to rule over the ashes. The US will burn down the world to rule over the ashes. SCO's philosophy. 70 years ago, China and India came together and developed 5 principles of foreign policy that both would adhere to. In the Indian language, they were called Panchsheel, and they were as follows. Mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Mutual non-aggression. Mutual non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equality and cooperation for mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. How beautiful. The following year, these principles were enhanced in the famous Bandung Conference in Indonesia, where 30 Asian and African countries assembled and laid out the vision of non-alignment and development. The drive towards decolonization was a wonderful idea that got derailed by American wars in Asia, including proxy wars. For example, Vietnam War, which spread to Laos and Cambodia, U.S. attempt to arm Tibetan rebels, India-China conflict fueled by the U.S., and U.S. regime change in Indonesia, followed by the installation of a brutal dictator, etc., ruined the Bandung spirit. SCO is now trying to revive a similar wholesome and peaceful philosophy based on the Shanghai Spirit, which are mutual trust, mutual benefit, equality, consultation, respect for cultural diversity, and pursuit of common development. In essence, SCO is the ideal template for a multipolar world. The values and objectives of SCO are completely antithetical to the imperialist and colonialist principles that have dominated the world for 500 years. For example, the colonialists had no respect for cultural diversity. Wherever they went, they either committed genocide, enslaved people, or ruled over them. Non-Europeans were deemed as savages. Even now, there's no such thing as mutual benefit or common development in the American foreign policy. The US goal is to stay number one and keep everyone down. The US relentlessly pursues divide and rule geopolitics to hurt allies and rivals alike. And there's no such thing as equality. The US will dictate and everyone else must obey. While Russia is building north-south transport corridors and China is building a massive east-west Belt and Road initiative, the US is bombing Gaza and destroying Ukraine. Oh, not to mention the Nord Stream pipelines, which were blown up by the CIA. And rather than competing with China, the US wages trade war, tech war, and economic war to contain China, not to mention dreaming of starting a catastrophic war in South China Sea. Rather than let Americans enjoy high-quality $15,000 electric cars, the US elites have essentially banned Chinese EV. Multipolar world is inexorable. Perhaps the US had a lot of sway over the developing nations a few years back. However, everyone is starting to see the US as a paper tiger now. Why? First, the 2008 financial crisis, which revealed the US economy to be a fugazi, to use the word from the movie Wolf of Wall Street. It was followed by losing the title of the largest economy by PPP GDP in 2015, and then the disastrous handling of COVID, and then the proxy war on Russia using Ukrainian Nazis, and then the theft of Russian foreign exchange reserves, and the inability of US and Europe combined to defeat Russia. Also, the inability to either decouple from China or to contain its technological progress. Finally, the genocide in Gaza and trying to bully the International Criminal Court, or the ICC, and the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, have all revealed the US to be an immoral, rogue, and an impotent empire. This is why Modi is visiting Russia as the first bilateral visit after his third-term election. Ahead of his visit, Modi hailed India's special and privileged strategic partnership with Russia. Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar added, "The only constant in global geopolitics is the ties between India and Russia." When Modi landed in Moscow, he was welcomed by a red carpet and honor guard and Russian deputy prime minister. Later, Modi went to his friend Putin's residence and the two leaders hugged one another. It was the hug that immediately broke the hearts of Western pundits on social media. During his visit to Russia, Modi will be discussing several trade and financial initiatives under the BRICS umbrella. If BRICS Plus manages to create a trading system or even a currency, it would truly herald the end of the US dollar's hegemony. The BRICS group is also working on an independent grain exchange system. If that system is successful, it can be replicated to trade other vital commodities. Considering that the BRICS countries' global market shares are 33% of natural gas, 42% of oil, 43% of corn, 48% of wheat, and 58% of rice, the impact of such a system will be earth-shaking. Given how many other countries are rushing in to join BRICS, the dollar's future is bleak. Ignoring the public threats from the US, Modi has significantly boosted India-Russia cooperation in military, For example, India bought the Russian S-400 missile defense systems. More remarkably, India is partnering with Putin on numerous strategic areas such as joint production of weapons, reciprocal access to military facilities, joint deployment of troops, warships, and fighter jets, which will be unprecedented for India, and logistics agreements, which would facilitate the use of each other's military bases for refueling, repairs, and resupply. There are two more transformative deals with respect to trade: the Chennai-Vladivostok maritime route and the International North-South Transport Corridor, or the INSTC, which are aimed at long-term integration of Indian and Russian economies. The win-win paradigm of these initiatives is indisputable. The INSTC also brings Iran, another American adversary, into the mix. India has even defied the US to strike a 10-year deal to develop the Chabahar port in Iran, another SCO member. Conclusion: the world is inexorably moving towards multipolarity, said Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar. He is openly saying that the American hegemony is dead, or will be soon. So what does this mean for Asia and Eurasia? First, India-China relations will get better, and eventually Russia-Europe rapprochement will happen. The US is weakening in every aspect: economy, military, technology, soft power, and even internal cohesion. In summary, the American empire has proven itself to be increasingly irrelevant. Thus, the global south now, and eventually Europe, will start embracing strategic ambiguity, all alignment, and multipolarity. The US can join this new and peaceful paradigm of multilateral organizations and forums like SCO and BRI, or turn into a bitter nation wallowing in delusions of the past. The end. Please make sure to like and subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and follow me on Twitter X at Kanthan2030. Thank you.